Welcome everybody. Welcome to the Neville Gilfoy Talk on Entrepreneurship and Innovation in Atlantic Canada. We're really excited to have you in person this year. Last year we did it virtually. We are taping this. We have the ability to share it to a broader network after this. But I'm not going to stand up here and talk. I'd like to introduce Don Mills. Don is going to open up the event. We will have a panel for about 30 minutes. Keep your questions. Think of some great questions to ask, about 10 minutes or so for some Q&A at the end. And then we're going to have Jamie actually close out our event for us. So with that said, I'm going to hand things over to Don to say a few words.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. When Neville passed unexpectedly, my brother and I said we need to continue the conversation that Neville started. If Neville was good at anything, it was starting the conversation, and we had some great ones over our relationship period. And so we went out and raised some money to make sure that there's a scholarship to support entrepreneurs, and this talk continue the conversation. And I know Neville would be pleased, right, Anne? Neville's wife Anne, and his son Mike, and nephew are here, Brandon. So thank you for coming as well. And as somebody who's advocated for this region for all my career, Neville and I were really closely aligned in terms of the need to talk about the challenges that this region is facing. That conversation is still important. We're starting to see some success. Neville, I think, would be thrilled about what's happening in this region now. And this conversation today is the continuation of that. And in fact, Neville's inspired me, Anne, to start a podcast series about a year ago to continue the discussion about economic issues. And I'm doing that with David Campbell, who's the former chief economist of New Brunswick. And that's what Neville would have been all about, and he would have been doing it if we hadn't done it. So with that very short introduction, I'm pleased to turn it over to Louis, who will introduce the panel. Thank you again for coming.
Thanks, Don. I'm gonna start by just giving you giving Sarah and Bradley a chance to come on up to the I guess I'd call this a dais where we're sitting. Come up to the front. I'll say quickly, my name is Beaubien, I'm the Associate Dean for Innovation here at the Faculty of Management. I've been involved in startups from founding them to helping them over the last 20 years, and so I'm particularly fascinated by this. I'm also a proud Nova Scotian my entire life, so the theme of this conference, this discussion, is near and dear to me. So I'm going to first turn to Sarah, the managing partner for National and the founder of Sandpiper, to maybe give a few words to introduce yourself, and then I'll go to Bradley, and then we'll start the conversation. Sarah?
Sure. So I think we said that we weren't going to talk about ourselves, but thanks, Louis.
Oh no, sorry.
Well orchestrated. So my name is Sarah Young, as Louis said, and I started with a business that I bought and built with two partners, and then we sold, which is sold it to National, and so have been an entrepreneur and continue to run my business, and I always say run it like it's a startup. And then, as Louis said, I, with two other general partners, we launched a venture capital fund at the beginning of COVID, and we are raising a $20 million fund. We've actually spent quite a bit of time in this exact room, where we are investing in women-led tech-enabled companies, and so which is really exciting. And I've probably used the most innovation, I'm just saying this, I live in a house with 3 teenage boys, and it takes a lot of innovation to get through my days. So,
Thanks, Sarah. I'll turn to Bradley Daye. Bradley, founder of P4G. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about why you want to be part of this conversation today.
Yeah, so first things first, I think that we should take a quick moment to recognize that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded, unsurrendered ancestral territory for the Mi'kmaq people. And I don't think this conversation would be possible if that was the case, right? So just want to take a moment to recognize the space that we inhabit and have the privilege of living and thriving in every single day. My journey started in North End Halifax, and I like to say that it started way, way before me. We're here to talk a little bit about legacy too, right? And sort of Neville, and the part of my legacy, my family has been here since 1789. My ancestors came as Black pioneers through the Digby part of the province. So my 7th great grandfather would have established a community called Jordantown, and one of 50 plus Black communities across Nova Scotia. So I always like to start with a little bit of kind of family history and what motivates me and inspires me. In more recent history, my grandfather, Buddy Daye, would have done a lot to leave a legacy in Nova Scotia and beyond. And again, another big inspiration of mine, as my 3 values are compassion, community, and love. And so I believe my purpose is to connect communities through building trust, and we've been doing that through the work that we do, through the business that myself and my co-founder established about 5 years ago. We had our inaugural 5th AGM yesterday, and realized that we're supposed to be doing AGMs every year. So we've been focusing a lot more on impact than about like reporting on said impact, but it was really nice to start to see some numbers around like what we do and the impact that we have. So we're in the recruiting space. We've been helping organizations attract and retain talent. It's been a big part of the conversation globally, but Nova Scotia has always been kind of the have-not provinces, and about 5 years ago we wanted to start changing that narrative and that conversation, inspired by the Agony report. Let's not write another report. And it's like, okay, we need to write a report. But yeah, I guess I think we'll kind of get into some stuff and have a good chat about like entrepreneurship and how that's changing, and how the workplace is changing, and that's a lot of our work and a lot of what we strive to inspire. So happy to be a part of the conversation and be a part of the legacy and all of those things. Happy to be here.
Thanks very much. The first question I want to ask is kind of a larger, broader one, and that's in the last couple of years, we've seen a big change in Nova Scotia. We've seen big growth in population. We've seen change in the nature of industry. It certainly has come out of circumstances that were harsh and hard in the sense of COVID and everything that came around with that. But it has created an economic momentum of sorts in Nova Scotia. And I wonder, do you think that's something that's sustainable, and what do we have to do to keep that forward motion going here in Atlantic Canada and Nova Scotia? Any thoughts? Either one?
I can jump in. So we do a lot of work in the impact sector. So I don't like defining nonprofit by what it's not. So we define it by what it is, which is impact in community. And so whether it's nonprofit or social enterprise or even for-profit that is impact focused, we operate a lot in that space, and that too is a big part of our economy here in Nova Scotia, and a big part of how we need to move forward. And we're in the human space, we're in the people space, and I think in order to sustain and maintain and continue to grow, I think that's going to be how we welcome people and how we cultivate a sense of belonging within the workplace. So we can talk about kind of industry, and we can talk about trends, and we can talk about tech, and we can talk about those things, but I think how we treat our people is going to really differentiate the workplaces here. And if we're going to double in population in Nova Scotia, which is what people are talking about, how are we welcoming those people? It's not going to be through the births of babies. It's going to be through people that are immigrating here, or even coming from another potential migration here. So how are those people being welcomed into our workplaces, and how are we creating a sense of belonging in the workplaces? I think how we can innovate in a lot of ways, because it's not easy, and that's where our primary focus has been. So yeah.
Before I go to you, Sarah, can I go back? And, one thing I think about, the cooperative movement in North America really had a big start here in Nova Scotia. And I actually have a bit of a family relation to two folks from Cape Breton, Jimmy Tompkins and Moses Cody, who were priests that were deeply involved in that cooperative movement, Breton workers co-ops. And I guess my question would be, I think a lot of those principles were in those founding ideas of when co-ops started to come to the fore in the early 1900s. And do you think those institutions are things we can still lever to get that sense of community, that sense of belonging in industry and innovation? Or do you think we need new tools? Or is it an evolution of those tools like the co-ops that have existed here for a while?
That's a good question. I'm not totally sure how to answer it. I'll do my best to, I think business structures are a confusing thing for a lot of people, especially in the social sector, especially in kind of the impact space, and it gets confusing really quickly.
Yeah.
Co-ops are a great tool to have a human-centric environment where everybody's bought in, literally, into the business, a sense of ownership, because they actually do have a bit of an ownership, a stake in the business. So I think that is a great model to avoid things like just the concentration of wealth. And so I think for me, that's definitely a place that makes a lot of sense in terms of moving things away from just building wealth to build wealth, instead of what is your impact. And so we are structured as a CIC, and when I say that, a lot of people say, well, what is a CIC? It was a new business structure that only started in 2017, and I do believe it's kind of a soft landing for capitalism, and I could go on a whole kind of rant about that. I'm not sure this is the audience in this space, but it's a community interest company, and what that means is we operate in a lot of the same ways that for-profit operates, except 60% of our profits are mandated to go back into the community, hence having an AGM and an impact report and talking about that and reporting on it. But yeah, I think that why are we doing the things that we're doing? It's as simple as that. We can structure it as a co-op, we can structure it as a CIC, we can structure it as a nonprofit. Why are you doing it? What are you trying to accomplish? What impact are you trying to have is kind of where I come back to. So yeah, I think that we need to dramatically get away from things that are destroying our environment and destroying the way that we are in relationship with nature and all of these kinds of things. And can CICs and co-ops be a solution or a part of that solution? Absolutely.
Sarah, any thoughts on sort of Atlantic Canada, how it's growing as a community, how it's growing as it's an economic force? What do we do next?
Absolutely. So I'll pick up on a couple of things that Bradley just said. So I think that first, remembering that people are at the center and individuals are at the heart, and I think your point, Bradley, that remembering that how human-centric, whether it's entrepreneurship or community or innovation, that how do we inspire or welcome people. And so I think that how do we remember that we're going to have to motivate and inspire individuals. And I think sometimes we talk about whether it's organizations, or we talk about institutions, or we talk about regions, and we almost we take out the accountability, or we take out the inspiration of individuals. So we really have to remember that unless we're bringing individuals along on the journey, then or that we're motivating them to make change, then we're not going to we're going to either stay in the same place, or they're not coming along. I also think that I think when we, your point about the scale and impact, or your point about impact, that sometimes we separate, that you're either looking at scaling or you're looking at impact. But I think how do we do both? How do we actually, you can have impact and you can aspire to scale in a significant way, and that you don't have to do one or the other, but how do we actually combine both? And I think that to me is also linked to another point, that how do we, I think in the last 2 years we've also seen that we are connected and intertwined and dependent on the rest of the world, and that's, for better or for worse, the way it's going to always be. And so we want to welcome people from the rest of the world. We need to recruit people. We also need, when we talk about our ideas, our people are going to go out into the world. We're going to have people coming and going, products and services. And so how do we make sure that we encourage that as well? And so that, again, that scale and impact, that how do we make sure that they're better married together, rather than, I think for a long time, you were choosing between one or the other. You had a company, or you had your growth plan, you had to choose one or the other. So I think, I definitely think when we look at the region and what's next, we don't just say we're either going to grow at all costs, or we're going to choose impact. And I think right now, if you put all of them together, we want to grow, but we want to bring communities and individuals along. We want to make sure that it's quality of life, that it's a place where people can raise their family. We want to make sure that companies can grow and have meaningful jobs, and companies that are going to go out into the world and have an impact, and make sure that they're making a positive contribution to the environment, not doing harm. How do you put all of these things together? It's more shades of gray than it is just black and white.
Sure. And so we've talked about like this idea of impact and economic growth. You see in the news every day lately about the pressures of inflation, wage inflation, how there's in certain sectors job shortages. Is it possible, and how do we do it to sort of keep that creativity, that imagination, and that desire, that inspiration alive, and at the same time build into that skills gap and that job gap? How can that, is that an easy balance to maintain? And if it isn't, how do we balance it between filling those needs in the workplace, but keeping those people that are moving into those positions excited about what they're doing, inspired by it, and feeling like they can have impact as well as other forms of success? I guess impact really should just be the measure of success. It shouldn't be impact or something, as you're saying. Impact is defined by multiple things. How do we keep that sort of functionalism alive and the creativity and inspiration? And what role does the community play in that?
I think first is there's no shortage of problems to solve. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes it's how do we link what we're doing to either what are we solving or what are we contributing to? And I think sometimes we, as whether it's business owners or leaders of organizations, we sometimes forget to do why are we showing up? Why do our organizations exist? And throughout the organization, that people understand how they're contributing to whether it's solving a problem or making a difference. And so does everyone know what difference or what impact they're making, and whether that's within their organization, within their community, within the world, and I think answering that, being able to answer that why. And then I think going back to that role of the individual, I think sometimes we forget too, I think we spend a lot of time talking about the problems, but not doing how are we collectively going to go tackle those problems, and remembering that that we each as individuals can go make a difference. And I think we do pointing at our institutions to say it's someone else's problem. So I think that idea of how do we make sure that personal accountability piece is really important. And I think that part on your question around the creativity is, well, how are we going to solve it? And so I think if you can answer the why for your organization, well, then start doing here's a problem within our community, rather than doing let's point at it and complain, or just let's talk about spend the time frustrated. Let's spend some time talking about how we might solve it or how we might contribute to it. I think is certainly a starting point.
Bradley, what about you from your perspective, especially in that recruitment space? How is it possible to keep those twin things alive of building those functional skills? I was born an accountant. I eventually became an accountant one way or the other. And keeping those functional skills alive that work in the workplace, but at the same time keeping that creativity and inspiration alive. Because I can tell you, nothing kills creativity like being an accountant. No one else.
I think there's a lot of creativity in accounting. There's so many different ways to answer this. I'll speak to it, just kind of even how it shows up in the recruiting process for us and how we've kind of been changing how recruiting has been approached. So I think if you lose sight of, so a lot of people, you hear the word fit tossed around in recruiting a lot, and that to us is the F word. It's been a word that it actually is the opposite of belonging. If you're looking at the people that you're bringing in to your organization and having them, what does it feel like when somebody says, we need you to fit in here, or we were looking for somebody to fit in? I think all of us at some point in our lives have felt like I'm changing something about myself to feel more, to make my experience more palatable for those around me in this certain example. So how are we letting people get closer to who they actually are and show up as their whole self when they show up to work? So we've first of all just gotten rid of the language of fit entirely. We used to make clients do push-ups when they were but what does that language shift to? Like, what are we actually looking to achieve? And what do people normally mean when they say fit? I think what they really mean is values alignment. And ultimately, skills can be learned. And as long as the organization has a really strong understanding of what it values and what impact it's looking to create. And we do what's called a cultural snapshot. So we come into an organization, we have multiple interviews with many different staff members. We'll send out a survey across the entire staff to get a sense of not what the values that are written up on the wall that everybody kind of is forced to regurgitate when they're asked, hey, what are our values? But what people are actually saying they feel. Do they feel heard? Do they feel like a sense of belonging? Do they feel engaged? Do they feel listened to? So once we've got a sense of, okay, this is what this organization really values, and this is what the gaps are, and this is what we need to bring into this organization. So who's going to contribute? And switching that language from fit to contribute makes even the hiring managers start to think differently about who they're bringing in. They're not looking for sameness anymore. They're looking for somebody who's going to bring a unique perspective that currently is missing within the organization and value that. And so I think from kind of there's a lot of talk around skills mapping and these sort of things. And I think where that misses the mark a little bit is around how do individuals' values and purpose align with the organization. From specifically the skills perspective, I don't think we do enough in recognizing non-traditional ways of learning. So people have life experience that has taught them some things. And we are trying to stretch the imagination of what recruiting and skills and these even terms mean in terms of like how we value a person's contribution in the workplace. So their lived experience can very well, maybe they don't have a degree, maybe they don't have a specific degree in that thing, they really align with this work and they care about it and they've felt it, they've lived it. So how do we make sure that we continue to encourage that creativity? I think we let fear dictate to us how we manage people. We let fear dictate kind of how we, just how we operate within the workplace. I think a lot of things come from that space of fear instead of allowing people to fail. If I told everybody in my staff that you're going to fail today, they would all clap and be like, yes, let's do it. But if I told everybody in most workplaces, you're going to fail today, they would feel terrible. And it's because we've created this fear of failure within the workplace where people don't have the freedom to express creativity and the freedom to fail and learn from it and grow from it. So that's how it shows up in our world, and those are the shifts that we're kind of in mindset that we're looking to inspire.
So, like, that's actually the word I was thinking of, mindset, when you were speaking, and it is this shift, thinking about changing orientation, how we think, and that words matter, fit to contribute. That how we think about what fear means and what failure means inside an organization, and we think about the environment we're trying to build, the environment we hope to have here, what would be an optimal place to live, work, play. Sound like I'm advertising for Southwest Properties, but an optimal place to be in that space. Where do we start and what do we do? Because starting in the workplace is great and important, I'm sure, but surely we can be starting earlier. Are we starting here at the university? Are we starting earlier than that? What are those first steps we should be taking to kind of build that space? How do we do that work at an earlier stage? So when it gets, not to take business away from P4G, but when it gets to you, it's not as hard.
Right. And if people get to us and they already have established values and purpose in life and know what they want to do, it's a lot easier to advise them on what type of career might align with those values. I think there's a big reckoning with this sort of great resignation where everybody's like, why am I doing this job? And there's been this great pause where everybody's had a chance to reflect on what they do and like, this isn't for me, this doesn't fill my soul. And so I think from the time that we're this high, we're asking our children, what do you want to be when you grow up? And how the hell are you supposed to know that at age 5? Like, yeah, and they find something they resonate with, and sometimes it's sports or whatever it is that they've been exposed to at such a early age, and they just get narrowed into not who do I want to be, but what do I want to do? And I think we need to shift that question away from what do I want to do when I grow up to who do I want to be. I think we've as people, just and the way that our educational systems are set up is not to have people go inward and understand themselves and have that security within themselves, understand the power that they hold as individuals. We're just asking them about their skills and what they want to do, and it doesn't give any sense of empowerment or self-worth to the individual. So we need to start asking people who they want to be when they grow up instead of what they want to do. And I think that starts from the time we're children and can be weaved through our educational systems, but there are some organizations that are starting to do some work similar to that. If you look at what Ashley Hill's doing at Prep Academy, and you've got the Futures program with Jill Smith, and there are people starting to, because I remember sitting down with Shaq. I was actually with Shaq and Ashley last night. But I remember sitting down with Shaq when he was just trying to conceptualize this, and we both had a very similar experience where we were athletes our whole life. It was I don't know what I want to do in university, but I can run around and catch a football, and that pays for my university, so I'm here. And I studied sociology and anthropology. I just liked humans and talking about people, and I guess that was a good thing. But we sat down 5 years ago and like, okay, we were just told to, be in the gym. We identified as an athlete. And then when that was done, it was like, I have no identity of who I am. It was, we were defined by the sport and the role that we played within that sport. And so now when he's, building out what he's building out in the Futures program, he's like, I don't care about basketball. And these kids just, the only way they want to connect with me is they want to hear that I played basketball, I went to university and all these things. And I just want to talk about like who they are and how I can help them, understand themselves and see self-worth within themselves and understand the opportunities that are available for them. So I think that, more people like Shaq that are helping, youth get away from seeing value in what I do and how high I can jump or whatever that is, and seeing value in just being themselves.
So what I do is moving from being the end of the conversation to being how you start the conversation. We can start talking about basketball, but we're going to talk a little lot more going forward. Sarah, you've worked with a lot of companies through your professional experience. You've mentored a lot of companies with your construction lab. How do you see that sense of identity being present in those successful companies that you've worked with? Is it really there, or is it something that a lot more work still needs to kind of find its way to the front?
So a lot more work, and so it's interesting, you use the word shift, and I think it needs to be much more dramatic than just shift. And I think one of the things that, I think, and I in particular, through the work of Sandpiper, seeing how I absolutely agree with Bradley that we need to start earlier in how individuals and how young people see their journey. But I also think we need to recognize that what has happened is that our structures and institutions have been established in a certain way, and just a shift is not going to be significant enough.
More of a shove?
Or a kick might be stronger. And so I think I don't think there's enough awareness right now of just how fixed that they are right now. And I think there's an attempt at recognizing how they're set up, but it's so deeply ingrained that it really is going to need a full transformation. And so, I think if you look at, and I think how one of the reasons why Sandpiper was born was that when you look at and use the example of CDL, is that is essentially the future economy. And you look at the birth of ideas and solving what's next. And you look at how few young women or how little diversity there is, and how when you think of founders, and so we don't have the sort of the new ideas and the different perspectives coming in and we have the ideas for what's next.
Right.
And so then what happens is when you start to go into who's going to solve the problems, and then who's investing in them, and then you have the institutions who start to narrow down how they're deciding too. So I think I think that we have to start at the younger age and do not only what is it that you want to do, but let's make sure we add sort of rocket fuel, that we're doing you don't even know, how do we make sure we're exposing and adding all the things that are possible in the art of the possible. But then we also have to do a complete transformation for our institutions and what are out there, because there's such a big change that actually needs to happen, because I think we have a very narrow outlook, but we've got very big problems that need to be solved. And I think our companies want to, but the roadmaps that we have are pretty antiquated.
Written by those old institutions that keep the conversation somewhat narrow and somewhat fixed. Yeah.
I honestly, I totally agree, and we have an intern from Dow. He's a student at Dow right now, and
Thank you.
well, be careful where you say that. Thank you. Wait till I'm done. He's been with us for like 2 years now, and last year he's like, I don't want to go back to school. I think I should just quit and start working. We were like, I can't even disagree, but no, go back to school, go back to school. And so it's like, I have never heard him speak about his educational experience in a joyful way. And that's inherently flawed. And I think, he has found, I dropped him off after his first internship. We wanted to get them to say something negative about us, so we brought them out to lunch and we were like, okay, what have we done wrong and how can we get better? And he was just like, there is nothing you can do better, and that was humbling and everything. But I dropped him off and he said, I just have to say that you saved my life. What are you talking about? He's financially, socioeconomically, just from the way I view the world, like what I was going to go to want to be part of some big tech firm and Silicon Valley and all of these things, but I just have had such a profound experience about people. I love everybody within this organization, and I've never thought that was possible, and I've never heard him talk about his education in anywhere near the way he talks about like in the workplace. So how do we get experiences for people that are coming through kind of traditional forms of education that, there's a lot to talk about experiential learning, but how does that become more woven into not just at the post-secondary level, but how do we weave that through K-12 and everything else? And so you have things in the privilege of going to Scotland for the Social Enterprise World Forum, and the most impressive presentation I've ever seen in my life was done by a bunch of middle school children that launched the Social Enterprise Academy, which was these children that ran businesses. They ran social enterprises as school-age kids, and they were solving big problems and having incredible impact. And they did this presentation in 13 languages, and it was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. There was like tons of different businesses that they had started. There was a visual presentation. It was the most diverse group of kids and languages and everything that I'd ever seen. And I was like, I'm embarrassed at the state of Nova Scotia's educational system if this is what's happening in other parts of the world. So it's happening other places. We can do it. We can replicate these things that are out there that do exist right now. And I think we get so lost in like Nova Scotia and this little bubble that we're in here, and we don't see beyond like globally what's happening. So anyway, that was a bit of a rant.
No, but it was a good rant, and like it was to tie a theme together. Before I think we're running short, so I do want to give everybody there a chance to chat. So give me 1 second to sum it up. And I know this is maybe a bit of a cliche, but a lot of the conversation does come back to the idea that we do have to start getting outside of those old parochial boundaries. And we have to think about doing things in new ways. And I think it has to be deep and engaged. Like, I agree with you completely, right? Experiential education is an amazing resource that we can leverage, but too often it can be done just as a replication of what was in the classroom, just doing it outside the classroom. And I think a big part of that is like honest engagement and staying away from, I guess what I call like a tick box mentality to how we're going to try and, we're going to be better at doing this. Oh, I did what was on the list, so I'm ticking it off. And I think breaking down those boundaries is probably a big part of it. But before I take up too much space with what I'm saying, can I turn it over to the audience if there's any questions for the panelists please.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the presenters. I feel as if you just kind of scratched the surface, what you could relate to us. Sarah, you made a comment about companies want to help. And since this is about networking to some extent, and looking around the room, I know some of the folks here, and thank you everyone for coming. There are some people here who are real potential change makers. How can this audience help both of you in placemaking and saying women investors? How could we help you to advance some of these goals?
You first.
That's a good question, Anne. Well, I think, well, I would start with, I'm a big believer of momentum over perfection. So I think I would say if starting with the, and I would apply it to action. So when I think of Sandpiper, it's if there are companies that you know that are in the region that fit, that are led by women, then I would say introducing them to us. But then I would also say that encouraging, going back to how are we encouraging more young women to go into, to be becoming entrepreneurs, and one of the things that we're seeing is that young women not necessarily having the confidence, that seeing it not necessarily as an option. So actually, if everyone left here and if they knew a young woman in high school and asking them, have they thought of, are there ideas that they're thinking of, have they considered? I mean, when I look back, I don't know that I ever heard the word entrepreneur growing up. Why was that? And so I would say, actively talking about it with young women. And then I think the other thing that we've also discovered is that when it comes to women founders is that we're very quick to offer mentorship. We're not so quick to offer investment and capital. And it's, so I would say whether it's through something like Sandpiper or through the network that's here, check yourself every time. And so if there's an opportunity and you have, and I would say that's even more so with underrepresented communities, that if you're having a conversation and that it's a company, if there's an opportunity to connect them to investment or capital and mentorship, think about going to, can you connect them to investment and capital, not necessarily always to mentorship.
And it's a really good point, and I think we talk a lot about mentorship, and it's incredibly important. I wouldn't be where I am without people in my life that have been mentors. But when we started P4G, there was nobody stepping up to be like, well, here's some money. I think that is definitely a much bigger issue when you don't have generational wealth either, and you don't have the risks. You can't just take risks and quit your job because you've got a family to support you or things like that. And so those are the most underrepresented groups that are affected by that. So how are we looking at those equity deserving groups to help them? And I'm not going to say empower, because that power is already there, but remove the barriers that exist for them to step into that power. I guess, I think to just continue to question why. We always look at what best practices are, but that's really, right now, we're always looking at what's better practices. So don't just look at what the best practices are within your organization or your business, but how could this be better? And if we can support that, happy to. I don't know if that fully answers the question.
Thanks so much. Hi. Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to pay tribute to Neville's family. Thank you very much. When I saw the name, I was quite relieved that he's not been forgotten. Hi, Sarah, and my two favorite people. Sarah's been a great mentor to myself, and I see Bradley as a young friend and mentor, someone to be admired. And I don't say that lightly, because I really do believe in what he's doing and where he's taking his the leadership of his program. For me, the challenge is, as a woman of color, a black woman, own business here in Nova Scotia, is are we ready to hear our voices and willing to engage with different voices? So we talk about investment, we talk about adventure, capitalists. Where is that investment in women of color? We don't have the privilege of having that mentorship. We need your voices to amplify our needs, because we don't get the kind of mentorship. And if I may share one story, Neville invited me to his office. It was in the penthouse of the Beaubien building. And I went up to the meeting to meet with him, and immediately the person said to me, I think you've come to the wrong place. And I said, no, I'm not at the wrong place. She insisted that I belong downstairs. But Neville heard the remonstration and came out and said, oh, Anne, wonderful to see you. And immediately disarmed the situation. I just want to say we need many more Nevilles. He was a tremendous mentor to many of us as new immigrants. But my question still remains, because where's the investment? Where do we bring our different voices? And not only that, I used to talk, and I teach this all the time, about bringing one's whole self. And I've stopped saying that now, because I don't think the audience or the wider community is ready for me to bring my whole self.
Thank you for that perspective that only you could bring. I appreciate it, and I resonate with it. I shared at the very beginning that my purpose is to connect communities through building trust, and I think we've lost a lot of trust. And we hear a lot of talk about safe spaces, and I was on a call with somebody yesterday who was like, I think we do a really good job of creating a safe. I don't want to say safe, because it's not safe.
Yes.
Safer, or safe as possible. And I think you're never going to create a safe space for everyone, but let's be cognizant of who we're creating safe spaces for, and how that comes to be. So, yeah, I can really resonate with your perspective on like bringing your full self, because oftentimes, and we've started to have language around these things and be able to talk about them, and I think that's a part of it, right? We get even caught up in the fear of talking about it and being a part of the conversation about being able to bring your full self. So, no, I just whether it's code switching or covering, that is fitting in, right? It's not being able to bring your full self to these spaces. So, how do we create spaces where people can contribute? And I hope to be a part of that solution. We're building out things that are tools to get there. So, with the help of Jonah, in fact, is a colleague of mine, and is a big part of that work. And I know he really resonates with what you just said.
Oh, yes?
Hi. First of all, thank you. I teach in the undergraduate program here in BCom. I teach first years, I teach fourth years. And one of the things that I try to get students is to stop being afraid to ask questions, stop being afraid to be heard. There is a thing, especially with first year students, where there's an expectation when you come into an undergraduate program, you want to go into business, that you have to conform to certain conventions, and those conventions are defined by, white middle class, society, and so many of us don't fit into that. So I talk about my own experience in poverty. I try to bring in international experiences and experiences of women, and I'm just wondering, because the thing that I'm trying to get them to understand is the idea that they're being educated in part not so they can get that job they think they need to do, but so much to nurture their own talent and to figure out what that talent is, and to ask questions and to not assume that everything you hear is the rule or the law. So as you know, you're speaking to a lot of these issues, and I'm just wondering what questions should these students be asking in terms of how they can align what they want out of their futures with the opportunities that are presented to them. What should they be asking employers when they go to those interviews? What should they be brave enough to ask?
Well, maybe I'll start with, I'll even take it back a step. I often think that even asking employers what they're seeking, which is what Bradley talked about that a little bit, that oftentimes what employers, or I can speak for myself at least, that I have not been looking for specific skills, or I'm not looking for that, the typecast that you outlined.
Yeah.
That really need the type of person who is going to ask challenging questions, the type of person that is going to is adaptable, that is going to that is analytical, like is constantly going to bring a different perspective. Like it's much more of the that isn't going to focus on trying to get everything right, but is going to constantly be challenging the status quo, or is going to bring that very different perspective, or going to be thinking differently, or going to and recognizing that their roles are going to constantly be different. So I think one, showing students that that's what that employers are looking for that, because I think one, so that they do see what their experience is going to be like. Then I think some of the questions then become, what are the opportunities within the organization? What will I be doing, and why will it matter? Or what will it, going back to that earlier point, how will it contribute to the organization? What will the outcomes be, or how does it connect to what the organization is doing in the community or in the world? It just, again, how does that thread connect? And in a lot of cases, starting to see students or young employees asking those questions. I think the other part too is starting to see young employees asking around how around flexibility. So they want to figure out how their worlds fit together. So whether it's around impact too, they want to figure out how they're going to make a contribution to the community too. So again, if that's the sort of thing that if it's within the organization or it's outside the organization too.
It's a good question, and I think there's a few different starting points, and my mind's spinning a little bit. But I think one of the places to start is for these youth and young adults to understand that they actually do hold a lot of power in the job market right now. It's a candidate-driven experience these days, and not to abuse that, but just to understand that they have options in where they want to take their careers. So one, just like that confidence of it doesn't have to come from a place of scarcity and like, I need to get a job, and it can come from a place of being really targeted and focused about how you want to impact the world. And so to understand that is one thing, but then to get to a place of understanding how you want to impact the world is another thing. And I think to just ask a question is not necessarily the solution to even understanding that. There's some deep work that is involved in kind of stripping away a lot of the social constructs that we've told these children from the time that they were little. So how do we give them exercises, tools, to be able to do these things on their own to better understand themselves? So we were fortunate enough to be led through an exercise around purpose and values, whether it's like an ikigai, I don't know if you've heard of that, or whether it's something that you just sit down and write. One of the things that we did was we picked 5 people in our lives that could be here, could be gone, that would do a speech about us at the later stage of life. And you just write until you're done writing from one person's perspective and you go to the next person's perspective. And when you read back through that, you show yourself a little bit of who you want to become, and not what you want to do and accomplish, but who you want to become. You start to highlight the words that when you go through, they don't make you think about things, you just feel something. You go through and you see that word, and you're like, ooh, and you feel something, and you highlight it, and just start to get closer to what words resonate with you, what behaviors resonate with you. And I think you see those behaviors, you see those values in organizations. We get so caught up in like, I need to do this thing. There's a way to do those values in a million different ways, and which organizations are portraying those values externally. So when you're approaching your job search, you can start to see which organizations resonate with those values, because you understand yourself and you understand, what you're looking for in an employer, as opposed to like, well, I have these skills, I can apply them at this place, which is how most people approach it. And when somebody reads a cover letter, I've read thousands of them now, and they don't just see, a regurgitation of what's on the job posting, like they talked about these things, so I'm going to say that I can do these things. But they actually hear you say, when I was 5 and I experienced this in life, it changed how I viewed the world. And you folks are working on that thing, and I valued that since I grew up doing this thing. It's been a part of my life, and here's why. Is a way that I'll be like, you know what? It doesn't matter if they have the skills or not. They're passionate about this. It's connected to their purpose. They're going to learn the skills, and this is a place that they need to be. So, yeah, it's not about kind of casting this wide net. It's about being very specific and targeted about what aligns with you as an individual.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. I'm just going to say we're out of time. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate everybody's time, yours especially. Before I turn it over to Neville's family to say a few words, I want to join me in thanking panelists. Thanks very much. And so, thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody. Come over to the corner here. I'm Neville Gilfoy. I'm Neville's son, and I was very fortunate to have him as a great mentor in my life. I started a company that does translation services for organization and business, and I work in real estate. And this is just amazing conversation here today. I think 2 things that I'd like to highlight that would stick out is the dialogue. First of all, Neville was very much about connecting people and telling stories and hearing what everyone's unique perspective is, and sometimes conversations that are difficult even to hear. I think are really important just to be having that conversation, because as you can talk about it and people can tell their perspectives, it opens it up, you can understand and learn, and really I think that's the best way to move forward. And especially in the journey of entrepreneurship, like it's tough for everybody. Some people come into it with more privilege than others, some with more trauma and difficulty, but at the end of the day, we're all kind of in this together, and you just have to find your way through. And it's just about getting through the days, the good days and the bad days. The other thing I wanted to mention was legacy as well too. I think a lot about this as, I've got this pretty big legacy. I drive by the hospital, Neville's name's on the side of it, we're at an event like this. And for many years, I've really carried that as like, this is my thing that I have to carry forward, which I still believe. But then you look at what's going on in the world today, there's war, the climate's going crazy, we're halfway through 2022, there's really no guarantees of anything. And I think it's super important to think that, yes, my legacy has brought me here and it's shaped who I am, but as of today, my legacy is me. And I've got no guarantees as to how many days I'm going to have left. And you got to just be moving the needle forward every day. And so people can't necessarily tell you what to do. It's one thing you get to choose how you're going to do it. You got to get the help where you can. You got to help others when you can. But at the end of the day, I've got today. And what am I going to do with it? It doesn't have to be about business all the time. Sometimes it's just reaching out to someone we love. It's to connect. It's to help. Maybe just sit back on the couch and turn off your phone and fire up some shows. But at the end of the day, if you can do something good every day, I think that's a win. So thank you everybody for your time. Thank you to my family who I was supposed to address more, but they thank you for everyone here. Really great experiences, and Neville would be, I think, moved to tears with what's going on here. So thank you. Go get it.